Welcome to the Dragon's Den. I'm your venerable host Orochi, and today we are going to be talking about the newest addition to the Pathfinder 2 Lost Omens line, called Impossible Lands. This is a place of all about the fantastical, both magical and mundane powers that humans specifically are capable of. Specifically, only because the whole premise of the Impossible Lands is that it was thousands of years ago created by two nations where two individual archmagi, wizards of incredible power, rose to prominence, molded the countries to their whims, and then kind of decided they didn't like each other. And so they went to war. And they unleashed such magics upon each other that the lands between their two countries basically became an atomic wasteland. The whole area between their two countries is a chaos magic area where sometimes magic works, sometimes it doesn't, sometimes weird stuff happens, magic storms. It's literally like a magical fallout area. And within this area, only recently, within the past several decades, 100-ish years or so, another power has risen based on human ingenuity and especially dwarven capability of technology. And that is the city of Alkenstar, which has risen up to be the paramount of technology in the world, where they have steam engines and guns and all of this crazy, like, steampunk sort of stuff in a world that's predominantly dominated by magic. And it's sort of hilarious that the only reason why this area exists is because of magic, because two super powerful wizards just went to war and were catastrophic assholes with just unleashing shit. And when you look at those lands today, with both of the wizards sort of taken care of in different ways. One of them died, the other sort of died, but one of them is still kicking around, where the other one might be coming back. Not the ones you would initially think of. I'm not somebody who is big on Galarian lore. I did not play Pathfinder 1 at all. But I am absolutely loving these Lost Omen books. The first one I didn't care for because it was just a single city, and I've played a little bit in that city, and I don't really care for, fantasy New York. Like, hey, this is the mixing ground of everything, blah, blah, blah. I don't really care for that whatsoever. That's not anything that really interests me, so I didn't really like that book. But the last one that came out, the Mwangi Expanse, was just the most phenomenal book of mixing lore and mechanics that I've ever seen. I don't think 5th edition has anything close to being powerhouses like these books are. It is unfortunate that we only get one a year, so we only have 2 fantastic books, but they are just so great with giving you so much lore and background for these places to really flesh them out so that it makes you want to play in those areas. And so this video is just going to be a brief overview of the Impossible Lands, and then we're going to go into a little bit more depth of the 4 general areas that are covered within there, which is the nation of Geb, which is ruled by the ghost Geb, who was the archmage necromancer who died and apparently has unfinished business or whatever ghosts are attached to, because he's still kicking around. But has sort of, since the war ended, has kind of just gone into, like ghostly turn your brain off and exist mode, where he hasn't really been hands-on on anything and is just kind of like, my nation is stable now, and that's good, and 1,000 years just passed? Cool. All right. That's the impression I get from a lot of this. There isn't a whole lot of detail of like what he's been doing, but I find that amazingly interesting just because that's not anything you would really think of for a nation of undead. And we'll definitely get more into that when we do the specific video on it. And the second big nation is the nation of Nex, which is a fantastical ultra high magic setting that sort of mixes like the high magic of some of the biggest named places in Forgotten Realms with the general wide magic theme that Eberron has together, where there's magic everywhere. Everyone uses magic, but there's also just high magic everywhere, because you will see elemental people walking around and genies all over the place and demons and devils who are, in a bad spot, just slumming it in the prime material plane kind of stuff. And so it's like, yeah, you literally can't get by. You could throw a stone and you're going to hit some sort of high magic thing. And I think that's amazingly interesting. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do with that. And then the third big area is, as I said, Alkenstar, where they have super steampunk sort of ideas. And I'm going to get into the difference between steampunk and Western when we hit on that, because there's already been a couple adventures set in the Impossible Lands, and I will touch on those a bit when I talk about those areas. The fourth area is Jalmeri, which is amazingly interesting because it seems like it's far closer to a different continent than it is to these other 3 areas, but it's still considered part of that area. Maybe just because of the type of people who have settled there first, but I do think that's kind of weird. But Jalmeri is an area that is predominantly ruled by, I'm not going to say monks, but martial artists and people who have spiritual power based more on the perfection of self and not looking towards gods or being like oracles and stealing divine power. All of their power is just inner reflection and perfection of the physical body, which is super interesting to have like entire cities that are dedicated towards martial perfection. And they even have schools of it and the grand tournament, and they have just, it is their culture. Their entire culture is based on this kind of stuff, which I think is very interesting, and it can easily give you the sort of vibes of, like Japanese, well, and Chinese, martial artists and kendo artists who go from like dojo to dojo trying to find, big challenges and that kind of stuff. And I feel like you could really do that in this sort of setting, which would be super interesting. But that is the 4 areas, and this is the introduction. And we've got 2 iconics straight off the bat here, the Gunslinger iconic and the Summoner iconic. And I regret to say that I had high hopes from this picture right here, because this is a fantastic picture, especially with where they are. They look like they're in Jalmari. But there are no Summoner feats whatsoever in this book. There is gunslinger stuff in it, but I was very sad to see like one of my favorite classes not having representation by being, hey, this is, maybe the area where this character currently is or where they grew up or whatever, but not have any actual mechanical representation, which was unfortunate. And then we have a sneak peek of one of the new ancestries, which I think is fantastic that we're getting a serpent ancestry, the Nagaji, when one of the developers has been a hardline block on people requesting serpent folk be playable. Because he said he wants them to be villains, period. And so it's interesting that in what way does this not fit the exact same niche for most people who want a serpent folk race? This is basically the same thing. The Nagaji basically fill that same role thematically and visually, that you could just tweak it a little bit to fit whatever you wanted to do, which is, I think is funny, but also it's great that we have this now, because a lot of people wanted a playable serpent race, because now we have kobolds, which are your dragon humanoid race. You have lizard folk, which are your lizard race, and now we have Nagaji, which are your serpent race. That's cool. We have lots of reptilian representation now, which is my top jam. And then we have a picture of King Geb, and a picture of King Nex, and a map of the Impossible Lands, which is, I found a few interactive maps online of all of Galarian, and I hope that now that we're getting some more Lost Omens era maps of the individual areas, that somebody can update some of these Galarian full interactive maps, because I love them. I like being able to just look around the world of Galarian to get a better picture of where things are. I like that sort of, it immerses me so much more just knowing how all these little pieces are connected. Because I've only, I think, once ever seen an actual large full map of the Forgotten Realms, which there's a whole bunch of areas where I've never even seen content in those areas, which is kind of just like, ugh. Everything's on the Sword Coast, or, inland a little bit with Menzoberranzan and all that stuff. And it's just like, there's so many other areas that I've never seen anything touch on. And that's sort of why one of the many reasons I don't like Forgotten Realms. It's just because there's so much stuff that is just like, hasn't been utilized in any decent way. And you could probably say the same thing for Pathfinder First Edition, because there's a lot of these areas we're just now getting really in-depth stuff on, whereas that wasn't really the thing beforehand. And then this is how we have the timeline, which is super great. I really have to go over this with a fine-tooth comb to put into perspective all of the things that have happened since the founding of these two countries and the Great War thousands of years ago. Because you can see here, current year 4330 versus negative 7,000. Like that's a lot. That's a long time, and I just hope it doesn't. It keeps going. Doesn't fall into the area of like one of the things that I've looked into for like The Legend of Zelda is how they've got this massive, long, expanding timeline and stuff, and it quickly becomes apparent to me that these people don't realize what these times mean. You look at all of human history, like, is within 4,000 to 6,000 years. That is how old humans as a species are. We barely have any records before that to even suggest we've been around for much longer than that. And then you have like Galarian and Toril and basically any fantasy world is infinitely older because you have, we know what happened before humans were around. You've had elves that have been here for thousands and thousands of more years, tens of thousands of more years before that. And then before that, we had, dragon empires and giant empires and Naga empires and all these, massive empires that were here hundreds of thousands of years ago and have gone into decline. And it's like, that's cool, especially when you think about dinosaurs were around millions of years ago. But it's also like, try to put that into context of think about what intelligent races are going to leave behind as ruins of their civilizations and how future civilizations are going to come upon that stuff, because that's big. That's changes everything, and that makes it so that you cannot base any of your fantasy stuff on real world stuff because it is so far removed from it that it doesn't make any sense. But unfortunately, a lot of Galarian is trying to mimic different points in human history because those are the cool reference points we have, and everybody loves those kinds of things. But I think it's kind of weird to think of that with also thinking about all the previous, races that have lived on the planet and all the stuff they've done. Just like on Toril, the dragon nations and giant nations and all the serpent people, reptilian nations that were there long ago. It's like, these must have left magic that is artifacts and stuff that are so far beyond human comprehension that, there's these things still have to be around somewhere, and it had to have influenced the way that humans, dwarves, and elves have evolved on this planet. And I don't know, it's just, I don't think there's any like sociology or history nerds that have degrees in that sort of thing working at these companies that can really just like laser focus on, hey guys, we need to look at this a little bit more in depth. But I love that sort of thing. I love history stuff and just seeing how it affects everything else that comes after it. I think that's super interesting. And the few times that I've seen people try to model stuff after that is like, this is amazing that you're trying to do this because it is just so cool. It's one of those, instead of just making fantasy stuff up, you're trying to inject a really good amount of realism into it that, for me at least, really pulls me into it and gets me immersed. But here we have the peoples of the impossible lands. This just goes over how a lot of the current races and non-playable races work in this area. Which I love that. That's super cool. It's basically, hey, how do these people work here? And how is their culture different than it is in the standard block in the bestiary or everywhere else in the world, which is super cool. We've got lots of Naga, and we've got Undead's a big place. And then we go into Flesh Warps. And they got a bunch of new feeds. They should be up on Path Builder soon. I don't think they were last time I looked at it. And then extra genie stuff, because there's a lot of geniekin in the Impossible Lands. Then new Tiefling stuff, Tiefling, however you want to pronounce it. I hate them. I have an illogical hate of Tieflings, mostly brought up by all the people who try to make cute, like, lawful good Tieflings, and it's just like, no, you literally have evil in your blood. At least make your character have some, negative aspects to their personality based on that, even if they're fighting against it. I just hate seeing happy-go-lucky Tieflings. It irritates me. And then we have Gorin, which it's so strange that this is a species. They apparently were in first edition, but since we already have a plant-based species, this is the second one, another plant-based species, and I think that's really interesting because we have small ones and now we have medium-sized ones. That's kind of really cool to have that sort of representation and the options for it, and these ones fill very different sorts of ideas than the previous, even though they were sort of made in the same way by druids doing druid stuff with high magic. I think that's really cool. Like, the more we can dig into things that can fulfill different aspects even within the same general idea, I think is great. So yes, more plant people and more reptile people. More reptile people. Kashrishi. These are basically like rhino dwarves. They fill all of the same sort of we're small, stout people that dwarves do, which I find kind of redundant. And they sort of have 4 hands. I didn't really read up on them, but I don't know. It's kind of cool, I guess. But we got multiple ancestries in here who have Constitution as their basic ability boost, which is probably the worst thing to have. Even with, Kineticist, our Constitution class coming out next year, it sort of feels, oof. Unless you're going some sort of martial that wants crap loads of health, like Constitution needs to be your second highest score if you're playing these races, I feel. Otherwise, it's kind of a waste. But that's just the streamlining efficiency part of my brain looking into that. And that one seems much different than the other ones. Yeah, I don't know. It's strange. Then we have Nagaji. Yay. Super spiritual, super... I don't know how to put it without making it sound negative. They like small community sort of stuff, which is why they have so much infighting, because that tends to be a thing. And they're similar to lizard folk. They have a strength buff and then a free instead of strength and wisdom. So you can kind of build them very similar. They just have a little bit more open-endedness to them because you can make a better Magus out of a Nagaji than you could a Lizard Folk, which is cool. The 10 hit points for racial hit points, I think, is pretty useless. I really wish racial hit points had more effect on the game. After level 2, it's just a drop in the pan. Like, you're either a 6 HP, 8 HP, or 10 HP race. Like, 2 and 4 point difference. After, like, 2 levels, it's such a small difference that it doesn't really matter anymore. And the reason for the racial hit points to ancestral hit points to exist is to make it so that you can take a couple hits at level 1. You know, because previous editions of D&D were super deadly at low levels, especially for the more fragile classes, and that's basically the only reason why those exist. But then to have a difference in them that doesn't really matter all that much feels very strange to me. Because having above average racial hit points tells me that, hey, they should probably be more durable than other species. But if they don't have, like, plus HP per level or anything, then it doesn't really pan out that way at all. I don't know. It just feels like a mechanic that's underutilized. It does the one thing that it's supposed to do really well. It prevents you from being murdered at first or second level. But having them have different numbers of starting doesn't really fulfill what I think its potential is. Then we have Sacred Nagaji, which are basically just that right there, which I think is what I don't know if a lot of people do, but I thought that was what you would call not Naga. But it's not. Naga are just snakes with human heads, which, I don't know, to me that is really ineffective because I can't imagine a Naga that has no ability to interact with its surrounding becoming a superior species that has massive kingdoms and stuff. I don't know. It's very strange to me. But that one looks cool. The art on this, on the Titan Nagaji, makes no sense whatsoever because the Titan Nagaji, their heritage benefit is that they have their scales are medium armor and you cannot ever wear armor. And yet the picture is clearly them wearing armor. I also think it's a very bad choice because medium armor is not great. I mean, not having to worry about armor is good, but I think it would be really nice if somewhere down the line they had a feat that upgraded their medium heritage armor to heavy armor. That would be super nice. Because generally, when you're thinking about it, medium armor is only there for when you don't have enough dex to get rid of it. But unless you're gimping your reflex saves, which don't ever gimp your reflex saves because you need them, you're not going to stay in medium armor. Like, there's going to be very niche builds that will stay in medium armor over the course of their career. And to me, having things that are designed to be less useful late game for designed obsolescence, I think that is terrible design, personally. Like, what if I like the look of medium armor and the feel and the theme of medium armor? It's like, oh, well, you can keep wearing it. It's like, sure, but there's no real... I'm not getting anything from it if I'm also boosting my dex up. And, like, I do think medium armor should give you some sort of armor spec. I also think all classes should have at least a baseline of armor spec for their type, not just fighters and champions, but that might just be me. Like, if it's a mechanic that's there, everybody should be able to get use out of it. We have a cute little house. I think that's a shrine, because it is awful small. And then we have Vanara. So, just personal note, I hate monkeys and I hate monkey people. Just, it is a huge, huge no for me. So, if this is your jam, that's cool for you. I just, oh. And Vishkanya, I don't really understand the purpose of this, of their existence. They're basically Yantai purebloods. The Yantai that look perfectly human. That's basically their history. It's the niche they fill because they're rejects from when Naga were making the Nagaji to be their servants. Well, the goddess who made them, made these two, and these ones are only vaguely serpentine. And I don't really see why that was needed. I mean, for people who wanted... This could just be like a versatile heritage, I feel. And since we didn't have that in first edition, it made more sense for them to exist. I don't know. That's just my personal thoughts. I don't feel like pureblood Yantai need to exist at all. And therefore, I don't think this needs to exist. You could just take some sort of like snake-blooded feet and then just be whatever you want to be. I don't know. But it's cool that it exists. It just doesn't really fill any of the serpent sort of themes that I'm interested in. These pictures are cool, though. But, like, just looking at these characters, none of... That one sort of does. Like, I could see that being, like, a serpent sort of witch that really accentuates that sort of thing, but it would also have to be her surroundings that do it. If she was just out adventuring, then you wouldn't really get it. But the rest of these characters, like, they don't... Nothing about them seems reptilian at all. And I guess that's sort of the point, so that they fit into society and stuff, but I'm never interested in that sort of stuff. So that's all the beginning of all the really, really cool stuff that is in this book. Next up, as you can see, we'll be hitting up Alkenstar. And if you like splattering of rules, this has probably more rules than the previous one, because we've got multiple new ancestries, which are great. But a smattering of rules with some really, really deep, awesome lore. Pick up the Lost Omens books, because damn, they're good. I really love getting to know the areas that you can be in, because once you know the area more, as a GM, you can just pull up stuff there instead of being like most people who prefer doing homebrew, because then they know the areas. And there's still even a lot of, places in Toril where a lot of people don't know too much about it, so it's hard to just bring stuff up. So definitely pick these up if lore and mechanics is your jam. Otherwise, you can pick up all these mechanics as soon as Path Builder 2 gets updated. They're like, everything that's here is going to be on there. So basically, pick this up if you really love the lore. And the art's really cool. It is especially evocative of the stuff that you're going to be getting into with these. But that is all for now. Good evening.